Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Landlord Society podcast. I'm Charlie and you're here with HDK, and we're here to help people build wealth and replace their income through the Landlord Academy using the Australian property market. And today's episode, we're going to be talking about all things borrowing, maximizing your borrowing capacity, optimizing the money that you have, making it go the furthest distance possible. We're going to be covering things such as principal and interest versus interest only, setting up properties in trusts and corporate entities, and that's just a few of the topics that we're going to cover. Many more strategies. Handol, what are some of the biggest things that people can do to increase their borrowing capacity and borrow infinite amounts of money to buy property?
That's right. So for those of you who are struggling with this, you are in the right place. For those of you who don't really understand this struggle, let me explain to you why this is a very, very common topic that we need to cover from what we do here at the Landlord Society. So basically, the property prices have gone up. People's money isn't getting as far as they used to. Interest rates also have gone up, so their borrowing capacity has dropped. So their access to the market is reducing.
Yep.
So what people then naturally tend to do is, what can I do to borrow more money? And that's what today's podcast will cover. So first of all, something that I want to really stress for all the listeners out there is that all the tips and tricks and these methods that do work in the market right now need to be implemented onto finance products that actually work. Okay, there is a plethora of finance products out there. So with loans, there's different loans being offered by different banks and different institutions, credit unions. They're all different with the terms and conditions, not just the interest rate and the money that you're able to borrow. There's going to be so much more to it as well. I, as a lender, if I were to lend money to anybody, reserve the right to lend it under a certain particular terms and conditions, and also, cough off the money as well. So
yeah, exactly. Like a loan is not just a loan.
Yeah.
It's not just an interest rate. It's an actual financial product that will affect how you buy property.
Exactly, right. Exactly. And the things that you can do with the property as well. So, having said that, all of these, loans exist to allow you to buy property, of course, but the way you'll set it up is different. And that's why I cannot stress the importance of working with the right finance brokers to actually know that they are gearing you up for a property acquisition and also your subsequent ones, if that's what you're going for.
Yeah.
Buying one property, yes, that's Australian dream, but you want to be able to grow your property investment portfolio. So if that's what you're wanting to do, then you must work with a good finance broker. So with that being said, let's actually move to the actual things that we can do.
Let's get to the meat of it.
Exactly right. So the first thing is to be able to, this is a very simple one for those of you who've been holding property for a while, is to be able to just refinance your loan to something that would have a longer time period once again. So
you could start the loan all over again.
Exactly
30
right.
years. So that would reduce your mortgage payment?
That's correct. So on a monthly basis, it's just a purely mathematical formula. If you've been paying your mortgage for the last, say, 5 years, and let's say you've been paying some of the principal down too, good on you. There's 25 more years to go. That's basically dividing up your principal, your original amount over the next 25 years now.
Exactly right. So when you get to I think it's year 22 of the mortgage, that at that point, if you're paying down principal and interest, it'll only take 8 years until you pay off the mortgage because of that. Because the more you pay off, the faster you're paying off the interest.
Yeah.
And then your house is paid off. However, with that being said, that's not necessarily... That achieves the outcome of paying off a house. So the outcome that we're trying to achieve here is to accumulate properties and build wealth. So refinancing is not always a bad idea, especially if it's going to give you the serviceability to then buy a property.
Yeah.
That's going to outgrow your ability to pay the property off.
That's right. And so the logic behind that is the sum that you will need to pay off over the next 25 years. Now, by way of refinancing to a new term of 30 years, you are then able to divide that payment into 30, for example. So a much bigger denominator, right? In that case, in that case, your monthly liability, the monthly cash outflow, right, of the property will reduce, right?
Yeah.
So you own this property, and every month you're paying less money than you did before to own this property. In which case, the banks are going to look at that as a lowered spending.
Yeah.
Okay. Lowered expenditure, which means you have more income to spend on a new loan. So if you really want to, that's a really good structure. It's a mathematical way to actually deliver a higher ability to service a loan, which means higher ability to pay off and repay the loan on a monthly basis. So your repayment could go from $3,000 to $2,500, and that could go a long way in increasing your serviceability incrementally. And of course, if you've been with your current product for longer than 5 years and up to about, let's say you're around the 10-year mark, then there's more the reason why you should be refinancing, so that you basically recalibrate your loan to actually have a longer period of repayment on the same principle that you got to pay down.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. So that's one really important thing. So second is interest only versus principal and interest.
Yeah, principal and interest, very interesting one, isn't it? Oh my gosh. Yeah. So principal and interest is, obviously you're going to pay off your mortgage again, but it can feel very risky to go interest only because you're not paying any of your debts off. However, buying the right property will increase, as we say all the time, will increase in value, which will reduce the relative loan you have on that property.
So the thing about principal interest versus interest only, if you're okay with it becoming interest only from an investment point of view, which you should be if you had picked the right property and it's been a good investment for you, but more importantly, what that will do is it will reduce the amount of money you pay to the banks on a monthly basis. Because you're not including any principal in your repayment, the principal will just disappear. And it is a nice temporary solution to temporarily showcase that you are no longer paying that extra money to the bank on a monthly basis. And the bank that will assess your cash flow position because of that structuring will say, hey, you've got extra money sitting in your bank account, so they will be able to lend you more money.
Now, typically, how long do banks allow you to go interest only for?
Well, that depends on the product. Once again, there's really no ballpark for this. For a typical mum and dad off the cuff loan, it can be anywhere between 2 to 5 years. But that's a conversation you need to have with your finance broker, and understand that you need to ensure that there is a strategy angle behind it as well. You can't just go, oh, I'm just going to pay less money because I feel like it, or just go interest only because that's just what I want to do, or I'd rather stick to principal, and the vice versa. I want to pay principal and interest only because I want to really, really pay it down, because typically that might not end up being the best strategy for you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, look, going interest only may be a really good way to reduce your monthly liability to the bank, so that frees you up for more serviceability. Look, and let's move on to the next one. This is probably one of the most important ones, is to set it up on right structuring. So the structuring is a big one, and a lot of people make this mistake. So I'm going to use some examples here. Let's say there was Jackson, who was able to borrow, say, $600,000 from the bank. So he came up with $200,000, saved up really hard, and he was able to then buy a $700,000, and he borrowed $550K, paid a bit of stamps, whatever. So he's got $50,000 left on his serviceability. Now, if there was a $50,000 house out there available with a $10,000 deposit, yeah, Jackson would go ahead and buy that again. But by that time, Jackson cannot buy any more properties. Serviceability is basically like a battery. You use it up, you can't build it up again.
You got to recharge it.
Yeah. And there is a way to recharge, and that's called making more money. Okay.
Problem solved.
Right, just go and make more money, or get a promotion. But the promotion has to be quite drastic. I mean, for Jackson, who has no debt, who has no kids, no wife, no nothing, is just living a very humble lifestyle himself, to have the serviceability of around about that $600,000, he would probably be making around about that, I don't know, $100,000 a year.
Okay.
So to be able to afford yet another $600,000 to buy something, he would need to get on a $200,000 salary. Now, This isn't a podcast where we tell our listeners, hey, go and get a better job and make $200,000 a year.
Yeah.
If that's available to you and you can revamp that, more power to you. By all means, go ahead. More money is great.
Whoa, hold up, Landlord Society. Are you sick and tired of the rat race and you want to start building wealth with property and generate passive income?
Then come and drop us a follow on Instagram and DM us the word Landlord.
The word what, Charlie?
The word Landlord, like the Landlord Society.
Okay, wait, Charles, what's our Instagram handle again?
At landlord.society.
You heard him, everybody. DM us the word Landlord to our Instagram to learn more about property investing. Now, back to the podcast.
But most people don't. And given the Australian climate, there's only so much income you can make on a 9 to 5 anyway. So most people relying on their personal income is going to tap out after 2 properties most. Most of them will. Given the property of the prices, just be realistic with everything here now, right? Just from a numeric point of view, unless you have a job that pays $1 million a year, in that case, we got 2 listeners to this podcast, right? But with the masses that are listening to this podcast, you are going to tap out if you're going to continually rely on your salary. So how do we get around this problem? There are certain banks out there who will isolate, and I will explain this point, who will isolate your borrowing capacity if you have properties under entities and trusts. Okay? Now, understand that entities and trusts do not feed across negative gearing. Meaning, if you have a property within a company or a trust and it's negatively geared, that negative return cannot be offsetting your personal income from a job that you do at an engineering firm. That's not going to happen, okay? So you want to ensure that if you're going to do this strategy, your property has to be neutrally geared or positively geared, or you will not receive the benefits of the negative gearing. And if this makes you turn off the podcast, you don't understand property. So what the bank will do is, let's say Jackson was able to buy that property, the first property that he's bought, and is not a principal place of residence, an investment property like a smart investor. Let's say he put that first property into an entity, a corporate entity, like even a trust or a company. And that company or trust in its isolation was able to service itself. It didn't require any external cash input, right? Then there is an opportunity for Jackson to have his serviceability intact. It's not a recharge because that takes energy, but it'll be intact. He can still borrow $600,000. The bank will look at his income to be able to put a property under a trust. Now, when he looks at property number 2 and he goes to yet another bank and says, hey, I want to put that under a trust. The bank will say, hey, how much money do you make? He'll say, I make $100,000 a year. My serviceability is $600,000. Well, bank will go, do you have other properties? And you might say, yes, I do. I own property number 1 in a trust. Some banks will say, well, hang on, then you've used up your serviceability. But there are other banks who would go, well, let's look at that property. Is it paying for itself? How much money did you pour into it, Jackson? How much money are you pouring into on a regular basis that would impact your serviceability with us when you get a loan with us? And they'll look at that property and go, oh, it's self-sustaining. It's okay. In which case, the bank will go, well, that doesn't matter. You still have your income and you're not paying a cent into this ownership. In fact, this is doing a service for you. This is working for you. In which case, the bank will see, I don't see any further risk with you. We will still give you another $600,000 loan should you have the deposit for the next house. But it has to go into, yet again, well, Jackson now learned, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's learned for himself, exactly.
He knows now.
He hasn't heard it from us.
Yeah, he knows now to put it in a trust again because he doesn't want to deplete that serviceability after buying 1-2 properties.
Yeah, and that's really cool because now this Jackson can create multiple, entities of like income producing property portfolios that the banks are going to look at individually and say, well, we can lend you more money based on that, based on those assets, based on that income.
Exactly right.
And that's how people can really snowball things rather than having everything in their personal name and then reaching a cap on what they can borrow.
Exactly right.
So and I've seen people fall into that trap without meaning to. They've done a really, really great job of buying 3 properties, amazing job.
Yeah.
But you reach it's like you're maxing out first gear. You need to change into second gear. And that's going to happen when you set up the right trust and the right entities. Yeah. Like you've said. So it's super powerful way to go.
It is. And the issue with a lot of people is then we see a lot of clients that come to us and say, yo, I got 2 properties. It's done $300K in equity in each of them. It's gone up $300,000 for both properties. I got $600,000 equity. How amazing is that? But bro, you cannot borrow any more money. So even if you have the equity in there, the banks are not willing to give you any more money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Oh, the banks will. Oh, but banks should give me up to 80% of the property. They won't though, because 80% of the property is a number so much greater than your income can ever service. It's not going to work. So then they'll go, oh well, can I transfer my property out of my individual name to a company name? Well, hey, guess what? Yes, you can, but you're going to pay stamp duty on the market value of your current property. In which case, if you got a $1.2 million portfolio now, right, across 2 properties, which is pretty modest in today's numbers, well, transferring 2 of those properties into an entity is going to cost you 5.5% of 1.2 million, which is $60,000, which could be worthwhile. Let's be honest.
Yeah, could
Could
pay
be worthwhile,
off.
but
Yeah,
it's an
could pay off.
expensive mistake.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to make that mistake in the first place.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. So if you're, we keep telling this to our followers is that, hey, you want to be a portfolio owner, want multiple properties to actually replace your income. We're not a buy one property podcast. We're a become a landlord over multiple properties podcast.
Yeah.
Right. If you want to do that, then you need to be able to have that mindset on your way in. Otherwise, you snooker yourself and you're done. And this is where the rich people are different. And most importantly, look, I understand having it under a trust, having it under a company is going to have cost implications for reporting, for doing your accounting, your bookkeeping. For you to beat that out, you need to buy properties that are going to rise above that as well. You got to understand that. You got to understand that. Then it comes down to the technique. This is why really good property investors who are good at property selection, good at drawing profits out of properties and making it work really well for them, are putting them in trusts.
Yeah.
Go figure, right? And another thing that's important as well is that in most states, there is what's called aggregation rules. And this will be different from each state, but having it under different trusts may mean that your land tax is assessed separately, allowing you to enjoy lower tax thresholds for lower site value properties.
Exactly.
Okay?
Really well put together. Really well said, man. And I think, same story. Like if you've got all your properties in your personal name, it's one way to get shafted by land tax.
Exactly right. I mean, land tax rates range all the way up to 2% in the higher thresholds, right? Think about it. That means if you have a $2 million portfolio, 2% of $2 million is $40,000 a year.
Yeah.
You make that $40,000 a year through rent and through hard work, and you're basically, all the margin that you've made, you cough it straight back to the government.
Yeah.
All right. That's before any income tax. And people looking at buying their first property don't have this foresight. And we're here to warn them of it so that they know on their way in, right?
Yeah.
What they are to expect when their portfolio does in fact grow. So it's a holistic process. I tend to tell people don't touch properties if you don't know what you're doing, because there are extremely costly mistakes along the way. And you might think that, hey, that's okay. Those are lessons that I'm willing to pay for, but is it really worth tens of thousands of dollars? And that is before you get shafted by the agents. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the market factor and the agents' tricks that will come and take more money away from you as well. So, not to shout doom and gloom, but if you know what you're doing, you're going to be saving a lot more money on your way in.
Yeah, it can be make or break, really.
Exactly
in the long term.
Exactly right.
And another really cool thing to consider with borrowings is that if you've got a primary place of residence, right, and you might have some equity because you've held it for quite a while. You've still got some debt on there. As we know, the debt on your primary place of residence is non-tax deductible. However, if we redraw or pull the cash from that equity on that primary place of residence, plus use the available borrowing that you might have to then purchase an investment property, you're maximizing the debt completely on that investment property, because that investment property is used purely from the money that you've borrowed and the equity that you already have.
That's right.
So that way the banks will look at that quite favorably. It's non-tax deductible, and therefore you might be in a position where you're increasing your borrowing capacity over time.
Yeah, here what the audience really need to make a distinction on, guys, is that you need to understand that when you borrow more against your primary place of residence, yes, it may look like you're increasing the debt on your home for that moment, but because you're using that money to purchase an investment property, the ATO is going to consider where that money is going to, not where the money is coming from. So
exactly,
for the purpose of the extra borrowing that you've pulled out of the place that you live in, was going to be for the purpose of investment property. That is then how the ATO is going to look at that and go, hey, you've got a loan against your investment property, which then all of the interest on that will become tax deductible with your investment property. So it's about converting that post-tax interest to a pre-tax interest, which then the banks are going to look upon that favorably to be able to give you extra serviceability, which is an awesome trick. So yeah, that's great. And look, another one that it should really go without saying, but it needs to be mentioned. It needs to reduce household expenditure. So
Let's go.
yeah, so
Let's talk about the elephant in the room, though. Let's talk about the one that everyone knows, but they may need just a reminder, and that's to reduce your bloody household expenditure where possible. So this is silly debt, silly expenditure, afterpay, gambling, all the things that you know you probably shouldn't be doing. Spend your money intentionally, do things that you love, and the rest, be wise with it.
I think, I totally agree with you, Charlie. I think things like unnecessary subscriptions, right? The things that waste your time with, Netflix and binge, and I think I have a friend who's basically got a subscription on every single.
It's like, sure, have Netflix,
Yeah,
but don't have Netflix, binge, Amazon Prime, like the whole thing. Like, don't have all of them, you know, because then you got to sink time into them as well.
Yeah, exactly right.
But we're not here to give life advice. We're here to give,
But expenditure,
property.
do monitor it and look at where your money's going to. If you can do better groceries, I mean, we've recently spent some time trying to optimize our health and our diet and things like that, and we've actually identified that groceries, there's no more middle class in Australia anymore.
It's crazy.
Right? It's crazy.
Man.
Inflation's gone out of
Sad
control.
to see.
Yeah, but there are very healthy options that you can have from a diet point of view, but it doesn't actually have to be expensive either.
Yeah.
So, that's something that you'll need to pay attention to yourself and understand what kind of options are there available for you. But changing up little things like that, over a period of, say, 3 months and showing those better habits to the bank would be a fantastic way to also increase your serviceability as well.
What about car loans?
Yeah, car loans are really interesting too. A lot of people need cars and they need to have it. Best thing to probably do is understand how the car loan can be structured in your current circumstance. So car loans, obviously, a lot of them have that loan parked under their own personal name. But if you have a business and you can put it under an entity, there could be some extra benefits there as well, without having to speak so much more technicality into it. If you must have one, I would suggest that you have some sort of business where you can park it under, where that liability isn't associated with you as much as possible. But if you must have one, try to be more humble with your car choices and try to buy them outright in cash if you cannot structure them in any way, because yes, it will eat into your serviceability if you do structure it all under your name, and if that's the only option that you have, that's no good. But that's why side hustles are great. A lot of I think Aussies are in a position to have side hustles which can have entities and structuring, and if they are able to have some sort of a use attached to that business, which most of them will in Australia, and there are enough tax codes out there that's able to offset your vehicle, and that's a conversation that everyone needs to have with their accountant.
Yeah, completely agree. So guys, coming around, a lot of this is just about working with a finance broker that is dialed in, understands all of the financial products as they apply to you. And that's probably going to be the best position to put yourself in when you make these big decisions.
Cool. All right, guys. So those are the tips and tricks to be able to increase your serviceability. If anything didn't make sense or you'd like to dig further into some of these things, send us a DM, ask us the questions, follow us on Instagram, and drop a follow on Spotify here as well. We drop these golden nuggets on a regular basis, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Cheers, guys.
Peace out.